Today's Sensible Money webinar with Dana Anspach and Amy Shepard will cover how to make a retirement income plan. Sensible Money was ranked 35 out of 500 firms in USA Today's Best Financial Advisory Firms in 2024 and was again this year named a Best Place to Work for Financial Advisors by Investment News. And for 3 years in a row, Sensible Money has been cited by Inc. 5000 as one of the country's fastest growing companies. The founder and CEO of Sensible Money, Dana is recognized as one of the nation's top thought leaders on the subject of retirement planning, especially this most challenging phase known as decumulation. She's the author of the widely acclaimed retirement guide, Control Your Retirement Destiny, which is also available as a podcast on Apple, Spotify, iTunes, and Audible. Her online course, How to Plan the Perfect Retirement, is available at thegreatcourses.com. And there are numerous recorded webinars and videos that can be found on our website or through a search on YouTube. Joining Dana today is Amy Shepard, a financial planner and a partner here at Sensible Money with over a decade of experience in financial services. In addition to her leadership roles at the firm, Amy is a frequent contributor on financial topics to major news outlets, including MarketWatch, Forbes, and The Street. And fun fact, she also knows quite a lot about raising chickens. I'm Nancy Fellinger, one of the financial planners here at Sensible Money, and I'm on the South Carolina coast while Dana and Amy are based in Scottsdale, Arizona. We have team members in other states as well, and some of the same technology we're using today makes it possible for us to work seamlessly with each other and with clients all across the country. You'll see a question box on your GoToMeeting screen, and we want to encourage you to add any question to it as we go. There'll be plenty of time at the end to answer any questions you have. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll follow up with a link to it within the next several days. And so now, let's turn it over to Dana and Amy to get started.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nancy. And because we're in different locations, I want to make sure our sound is working. Amy, are you there?
I am here.
Wonderful. If everyone can, again, just type in yes into their question box, making sure you can hear Amy and I. Fabulous. I see a lot of yeses coming in. I love it when the technology works. Before we get started, we have to cover our necessary disclosures. We're going to be using some examples, and we want to let everyone know they are simply examples. They're not meant to be guarantees. Obviously, there are no guarantees in retirement. We are going to talk about a lot of planning techniques that can help reduce risks, and we always have to let you know that past performance is no guarantee of future results. So, with all of that out of the way, why is making a retirement income plan so important? Well, there's a huge opportunity that happens when most people are in what we call either the pre-go phase of retirement. Many of you may have heard of the go-go, slow-go, and no-go phases, but I like to add a fourth phase, the pre-go phase, which can happen in the 10 years leading up to retirement or perhaps early in your retirement years. It happens at a different time for everyone because some people retire at 55, some people not till 70, but there are a lot of changes, as we can see, that occur. There's a lot of age-related rules that occur during this time frame. Amy, tell us a little bit about what you see with clients as they're going through this period of time.
There's definitely a lot that goes on here, and I am working with clients in all of these different phases. And so a lot of the times, we're in the early parts of this opportunity zone is where there's a lot of opportunity for tax planning. A lot of the initial construction of the retirement plan happens early on, but then there's just so many moving pieces as people are going through all these different ages that you've listed out here. As I said, I have clients, I think, working in all of those different things. There's Social Security, there's, figuring out what accounts to withdraw from. Medicare is huge, going through the different expenses of, having your own health insurance to switching to Medicare. And then, as you get to 70 and beyond, there's things like RMDs and qualified charitable distributions. So there's just a lot of moving parts and a lot of big opportunities that happen here that, once you miss certain things, you can't go back. So it's a really important part to know the details.
It is, and I think that's a really important point you made is, once you do miss certain opportunities, there's no way to recapture them. And not only are there a lot of moving parts, they keep changing the pieces on us.
Yeah.
In the last few years alone, we've seen, changes in Social Security rules. We've seen changes in the required minimum distribution age. We've seen major tax law changes. Currently there's some interesting catch-up provisions in the 401k rule landscape that if you're age 60 to 63, I believe you can actually put in a little bit more. Not sure why they picked such an odd and narrow window for that to happen, but there's all kinds of things and changes that we have to navigate. And so making a plan helps you navigate that process and then adjust it as these changes happen. Now, we'd like to get some input from our audience. So when you think of a retirement income plan, that is what this webinar is about, how to make a retirement income plan. What is the desired outcome? So I'd love to have your thoughts. Take a minute, can be short, chat into the question box for us, put a thought, but what is your desired outcome for a retirement income plan? I see some slides or some questions coming in. How can we make slides bigger? There is an interface in the GoToWebinar, and we found, depending on whether you're on the web version or the desktop version, it's going to look a little different. But there are going to be either buttons or sliders where you can slide the actual slide presentation part of the webinar a little larger, minimize the cameras, or not even have the cameras if you don't want to see us. And while I was explaining that, I'm seeing some answers come in. Nancy, can you see those answers?
I can.
What are you seeing?
Well, have enough income to live comfortably in retirement, not run out of money, make necessary and discretionary expenses while maximizing the number of years funded. Some folks just peace of mind. Others, monthly income and flexibility to provide income with as little volatility as possible. Always have positive cash flow in retirement, don't run out of money, minimize taxes. So some common themes there for sure.
I love it. And those all sound completely reasonable. Having enough cash flow and peace of mind really seems to be if I could summarize some of what I'm seeing still coming in, and we really appreciate, I know what my income will be. I have enough to account for inflation. I love these. And the question is really, we want security, right? We want to know that we're going to be okay. We're going to be comfortable, that we have the ability to navigate or be flexible enough to account for whatever things may come along. And the question becomes then, how do we build a retirement income plan to get there? Now, we can build a projection, but we also need a way to define how we will measure outcomes. And what I really love about a lot of the thoughts that are coming in are many of you are defining those outcomes in terms of monthly income or in terms of cash flow, in terms of the ability to live the retirement lifestyle that you want, ensuring income even in a down market. And I was in New York City earlier this week with a really fun group of retirement income people working on a project. And one of the statements made was, you can optimize for certainty of income or certainty of asset value, but not both. And I think it's a really important distinction that you make as you're planning for retirement. What you really want to optimize for is certainty of income. And what the headlines and traditional portfolio management focuses on is minimizing asset volatility. And particularly headlines lately that talk about the stocks being down. We actually haven't seen that in a diversified portfolio. Most of the portfolios are break even or slightly ahead year to date. But according to the headlines, you'd think we were down 20%. But the headlines tend to focus so much on that volatility that it can be easy to lose focus in retirement, that you're really planning for a reliability or consistency of cash flow. So how do you do that? Well, we're going to break it into 4 parts. Part 1, We're going to look at income that comes in not from the portfolio, things like Social Security, pensions, if you're lucky enough to have one. Maybe it would be rental income, but it's not coming in off your pool of savings and investments. Then we're going to look at how to lay out your spending map or a timeline of how your spending will change. And then we calculate the gap. Here's what's coming in from outside the portfolio. Here's what you want to spend. The difference is what we're expecting to pull out of the portfolio assets. And then we look at how we align those investments to that cash flow plan, to the income needs that we expect the portfolio to create or to accomplish. We're going to show you this by walking through a fictitious case study. It's a compilation of different clients. So if you feel like you recognize yourself in this, where there would be certain pieces of different plans that we've put together in this case study, but it doesn't represent any one person. Our couple, Larry and Ellen, are age 69 and 62 this year. Larry is retired and Ellen is still working. Neither has started Social Security, and Larry has a small pension of about $5,000 a year. Here's their net worth statement. Now, as we frequently see, we can see the bulk of their financial savings and investments are in these traditional tax-deferred retirement accounts. Larry has an IRA. Since he's retired, that used to be a 401k plan. It's been rolled into an IRA. Ellen has a 401k and an IRA. She's still working, still making contributions to that 401k. They've accumulated some joint brokerage account assets, and then they have a home that has no mortgage on it, and they keep a small checking. Oh, it actually does have a mortgage on it, and then they keep a small checking account balance. So how do we begin laying all of this out for Larry and Ellen? Well, we're going to start by looking at all of the cash flow, the income that comes in, but we're going to be looking at certain pieces of this. When we look at their entire plan, income will come from all of these sources, but we first want to start by just identifying what's going to come from things like Social Security or Larry's pension in this case, and then we'll calculate around that. Now, every once in a while when I show this slide, someone asks, how come you don't have annuities on this drawing? We simply ran out of room. There was not enough room to put one more arrow coming in, but annuities would go into this bucket too. So as I mentioned, we're going to break this into what we call fixed, certain, guaranteed, income, however, whatever label we want to put on it. But it's on the left-hand side. We've got Social Security, pensions, if they had annuity payments. Rental income we do put in this category because it's coming not from the savings and investments pot, but we could all debate about how certain it is. And then salary or part-time work. So sometimes one spouse will be working if you're married, or you may retire but take on a part-time job. We had a client who just liked to work 15 hours a week at Home Depot for her first 5 to 8 years of retirement. So, others that have worked in a golf pro shop. So sometimes there's part-time work that comes in there. And then on the right-hand side would be what we call the portfolio income. If we're going to sell stocks or mutual funds, dividends and interest, IRA, 401k withdrawals, bonds or CDs that mature, stock options or stock grants that we're exercising. So the first thing we do is we lay the left-hand side out in an income timeline. Amy, you do this all the time now. Tell us what we're looking at here, and I'll see if I can even zoom in and make it a little bigger.
Okay, perfect. So so part A is what Dana said. We lay out what we call all of your non-investment inflows. Sometimes that's kind of a mouthful. What it really is it's income that's not coming from your savings or your investment or retirement portfolio. So in this case, we have 4 different non-investment income sources. And so you can see in the current year, 2025, Ellen, she's still working. She's got $105,000 of income. Next on the list is Social Security, and neither of them have started. So 2025, there's no Social Security income, but in 2026, that turns on for both of them. So, Larry would be starting at 70, Ellen would be starting at the same time. For 2026, the Social Security numbers are smaller because they just started. It's a partial year. If you look ahead to 2027, you see those numbers increase. That's a full 12 months of Social Security for each of them. And, from that point forward, it continues to go up. We assume it goes up at 2% a year just based on inflation. And then Dana mentioned Larry has a small pension as well. So in 2025, you see his pension is listed 5106. That continues. It stays flat. Most pensions don't typically increase with inflation. So that's the first piece, is laying out those income sources and, obviously showing that they don't all start and stop at the same time. And so if you look at that line in blue, we are adding up all of the different income sources each calendar year. And so this year, Ellen is still working with the pension income. It's about $110,000. Next year, Ellen has retired, so she has no earned income, but Social Security has started, the pension has continued. Once we get to 2027, when they both have a full year of Social Security and pension income, they're getting close to about $90,000 a year in what we think of as guaranteed income sources. So again, that could be debated. We've seen a lot of questions recently about Social Security and what that might look like. We feel confident it's going to be there. So in their case, they're looking at about $90,000 a year in guaranteed income from 2027 on. This is the first piece. So just because they have that $90,000 of income, it doesn't mean that's what they have to live off of. And it doesn't mean that's what they should live off of. So that's one piece of their retirement puzzle. So we've solved for, what income sources are coming from outside sources, not savings and investments. That's what we've captured here.
I love it. And one thing that I want to point out on this, in their situation, they happen to both be starting Social Security at different ages, but it just so happens it will happen within the same year. And we don't always see that. Sometimes we see, Social Security where one person is starting and the next person's not starting for 4 or 5 years later. And so that can create even lumpier streams of income. The other thing that has come up a lot in various podcasts and discussions I've been in is just the value of having the inflation protection in your Social Security and the value of delaying, and at least for the highest earner of a couple, in many cases, not all, it's customized, but in the majority of cases, there's a tremendous amount of income security, bringing more security to the level of cash flow and the level of inflation protected cash flow that you'll have by having the highest earner of the two delay the start of their benefits till 70. Now, Nancy, I saw you pop on for a second with your camera. Was there a question that came up?
Oh gosh. You can hear me. Oh, sorry. It's like, if it's not the leaf blower right up my window, so my whole system just shut down.
All right, no problem. We'll let you figure it out, and we'll.
No, I'm back. I'm back, and that's why it popped back up. So
popped back up. Okay, yeah, no problem.
Okay, sorry about
that. I just didn't know if there was a question.
Nope.
So once we've outlined the income timeline, the next thing we do is look at spending. Now, one of the things I love about this drawing is it is illustrating the balance we're always trying to achieve of how much can we spend now, while also making sure that the 85-year-old us has still enough. Now, Amy, I know you're a big proponent of the book Die with Zero. Tell us a little bit about that philosophy.
I love the book. A client is actually the one who recommended it to me probably about 3 years ago, and they read it in preparation for their own retirement. So I wanted to read it. I went into it, thinking this is a great book for my clients. Retirement's still a couple decades out for me, but it's a great book for anybody to read. Really, the key takeaway for me is that it encourages people to enjoy life now, to stop and smell the roses. It really is about knowing when you have saved enough, and then the book kind of gives you permission to spend your money. I don't think that it advocates for frivolously, just like throwing money out the window, but it really helps, helps people feel confident and comfortable actually enjoying, the ride. Like if they want to take their family on a vacation, they can pay for it. Or if they, a lot of clients, we joke about, buying that sports car they've always dreamed of, and, you can do it. Or one of the things that stood out to me is there's an example in the book of going on a ski trip. And in the book, he says, you should do it when you're 60 because you probably aren't going to be able to do it when you're 80. And so it just really talks about how you only have so much time. And if you have a good plan, if you have metrics that show you're going to be okay, then don't worry so much about saying yes to things that might bring you joy in retirement.
I love it. And, it's that balance when we talk about one of the challenges is many of you attending this webinar have been good savers, and good savers don't make good spenders. And that challenge of turning on that income stream out of your investments, I have watched some of the most well-funded retirees, well-funded meaning they have plenty of assets to cover their cash flow needs, terrified to actually start withdrawing money. And I think that book, as Amy said, it's not about spending frivolously, and it's certainly not about actually dying with zero, but it's about a concept of how do you figure out what's okay to spend. One of the researchers in our industry, Michael Kitces, has done some research that shows many, many retirees who were good savers pass away with even more money than they had at the start of retirement. And that may be fine if their primary goal is a legacy goal, is passing along money to the next generation. But in many cases, they didn't do things throughout their retirement because they just felt like that wasn't okay, or maybe there was fear. And so it is a constant balancing act of figuring out how much can you spend while also preserving enough that if markets or the economy goes haywire later, or long-term care shows up, that you're still going to be okay. Now, we start creating that balancing act by breaking spending into different categories. There's fixed, non-inflating expenses like a mortgage. If you have a mortgage, one of the nice things is it is fixed, but one of the errors I've seen people make is they assume their mortgage will be paid off, but they forget that property taxes and insurance, which might currently be built into their mortgage payment, will continue on, and those expenses will have inflation. They will go up each year. So sometimes people forget about that. They're, oh, my mortgage is paid off. I won't have that cash flow. I'll just plan on this. There's recurring expenses. Home insurance we talked about, utilities, cell phones, groceries, gas, health insurance. There's annual expenses, property taxes, sometimes auto insurance premiums. Sometimes people pay their health insurance premiums. I don't see health insurance occur annually, but there are certain types of life insurance or long-term care premiums that only come once a year. It can be easy for people to forget about those when they're making their own retirement budget. And then periodic expenses, these are perhaps the things I've seen people also miss. Major home repairs. Maybe they live in an old house. The roof could be 25 years old. At some point in their retirement, they're going to need a new roof. That's a pretty major expense. Sometimes it may be some major dental. We know dental can be incredibly expensive, or it may be that people forget that they will have to buy a new auto at some point in retirement. So all of those things need to be factored in. And in addition, we like to account for these different phases of retirement. Amy, walk us through what this is and how we do this.
Yeah, so this is one of the things I find a lot of fun in planning out spending is helping, along the lines of Die with Zero, just helping people think of what they really want to do. How do they really want to spend their time in retirement? There's three phases. There's the go-go, the slow-go, and what sometimes we call the no-go phase. And what that really means is during the go-go phase, a lot of times people are planning trips that they didn't have time to take when they were working. And, in red, the no-go phase is not so much can you still plan a trip, around the world, but it's can you still keep your driver's license and take yourself to the grocery store? So very different expenses, very different lifestyles, changes happening throughout those phases. So like when we mapped out the income section, when we are trying to map out expected spending, it's not linear. We take into account these phases of typically more discretionary and fun spending early on in retirement during those go-go years. And then at some point, people do slow down. It's different for everybody, but discretionary spending does tend to taper off. And, later in life for a lot of people, there is not so much discretionary spending, but, more healthcare related spending. And so we account for those changes in the spending plan.
Yeah, we laid all of that out in our fictitious couple, Larry and Ellen. Walk us through how we laid out their spending timeline.
Yep. So we started with section A. Next comes section B. That's this expense section here. And first, there's a lot of different categories. So Dana mentioned not all spending is treated equally. So this couple does have a mortgage. That's the first line item that you see under their expenses. And it's flat. It's a fixed mortgage. So we break out just the principal and interest. That's what you see, about $16,000 a year. Then we just map out other expenses. So their home taxes and insurance is separate. We assume that does increase with inflation. In this case, we have built in a small amount of home maintenance that also increases every year. Living expenses, I like to think of that as the catch-all. So a lot of times when I'm going through the spending plan with clients, some people have very, very detailed budgets where they could tell you how much they spent on shampoo in any given year. We tend to take all of the detailed stuff and try to simplify it in fewer categories. And so living expenses, I think of that as like the catch-all. If it's not listed somewhere else, it falls into the living expense bucket. And we do include, an increase to that every year as well. We know, milk doesn't cost the same today that it did just even probably last week, but things cost more over time. Next on the list in this case is auto purchases. So we don't typically buy new cars every year, but throughout the course of a retirement, there's probably going to need to be some vehicle purchases. So we think of those as the lumpy type expenses. In this case, we've got a purchase in 2 years from now. We also have, vacation spending. So back to that idea of the go-go spending. So, this case study, there's want to spend about $15,000 a year on vacation, but we see it in real life that vacation spending typically does slow down. So Dana just zoomed out. You can see, in about 8 years, we assume their travel spending does start to decrease. Something I always like to emphasize is with this plan, with anything in life, as soon as you put it on paper or put it into a spreadsheet, it's already out of date. So just because we build the plan that says, we think you'll spend more for, 7 or 8 years on vacation, it doesn't mean that really has to happen. I have one client in particular who I always think about with vacation spending. He's in his early 80s and he regularly travels out of the country. He just spent a month in Hawaii. And so for him, we have more vacation spending in the plan because that's his reality. And so, we have to start somewhere. We put our best guesses in the plan, but then really important part is adjusting the plan as life goes on. There are a lot of items listed on the left in orange. And so all of the orange items are healthcare related expenses. So in this particular case, we have, a small amount of out of pocket medical costs included. But then we also have health insurance premiums for each. So in this case, Larry is already on Medicare. Sometimes people will ask, okay, Amy, we see the Medicare Part B premiums down at the bottom of that orange section. Larry's paying those. Why does he also have health insurance premiums? What are those? Well, when we're planning for healthcare costs, we tend to be on the conservative side. We want to we'd rather overestimate healthcare costs than underestimate them. In this case, we're including Larry's Part B premiums, and then we're also including premiums for a supplemental plan. So that's why he has 2 sets of premiums. For Ellen, if you see her age, she's only 62, so not yet on Medicare. Well, right now, and for the next few years until she turns 65, she has really high medical premiums because most likely, she's getting coverage through healthcare.gov. So, clients go to the marketplace, they find a plan, we build in those higher expenses. And then I see Dana's moving her little hand there. And so you see once Ellen turns 65, she can go on Medicare. Her premiums decrease because now instead of paying for, healthcare.gov coverage, she's paying for a supplemental plan. And then, she also down below has her own premiums for Medicare Part B as well. So lots of detail here. That's really one of the things I like to emphasize too, is that there's a lot of moving pieces. Nothing in life is linear. We want to try our best to map out some of those variations that we expect to happen throughout retirement. Medical tends to be a big talking point. It's also, if anybody, if you read any data about retirement planning, we all know that healthcare costs are a huge part of a retirement budget. And so we do spend a good amount of time building out what we think to be accurate estimates for every plan that we build.
And then the last item on here you'll see we have is taxes. So we have, FICA taxes that are being withheld from our paychecks if we're W-2 wages. If you're self-employed, you're used to making those quarterly payments or at least having to hold back enough of your income to cover those payments. And then federal taxes. And what's happening behind the scenes is those federal and state taxes are being automatically calculated based on where we drew the income from. So if we put in a stock sale that was going to realize a big chunk of capital gains, it will account for that. If we took an IRA withdrawal or did a Roth conversion, it will account for that. And so it's auto-calculating those taxes. Now, when we zoom out and look at their taxes over their lifetime, well, depending on where we draw the money from or what we sell, it changes. The green color is ordinary income tax, and that makes up the bulk of their taxes. And we see the tax bill grow. And that's simply because Larry and Ellen had the bulk of their money in tax-deferred retirement accounts. And even if we're successful at implementing a Roth conversion strategy that can help lower this lifetime taxable income, it's still based on the growth of those IRA accounts. Every year they have to withdraw a larger portion of what's remaining in those tax-deferred accounts. And so their tax bill will go up over time. Now, this is okay as long as we've planned for it. While their taxes are going up, we've designed the plan to maintain their after-tax cash flow and grow it with some reasonable inflation assumptions. And that's where the gap comes in. The gap is what is the retirement paycheck that needs to come out of the savings and investment portion, out of your portfolio. And specifically, we have to get down to what needs to come out of each specific account. So Amy, this is a gap timeline that we're looking at. Walk us through, I know there's a lot of numbers, but walk us through how this works.
Yeah, happy to. So right at the top where that little red dot is, it shows section C. So just as a recap, one of the first things we looked at was section A. That was all the income sources that did not come from the investment portfolio. That's that line in blue. So we took that and put it there. Then section B that we talked about was all the expenses. So, living expenses, mortgage, healthcare changing every year, and of course, taxes. That's the next kind of peach colored line, all outgoing cash flow. And then we do a fairly simple calculation. So we take section A in blue minus section B in peach. That gets us to the gap that Dana talked about. That's what you see in yellow. So in yellow, in this example, every year income is less than expenses, which results in that negative number that you see. So for 2025, for example, what that is saying is they have $110,000 of income, in this case from work and a small pension, $173,000 of expenses. And to cover all of those expenses, they have to take $63,000 from their portfolio to cover everything. So that's the big picture. We do that calculation every single year. And I sound like a little bit of a broken record, but just like income, just like expenses aren't linear, for most people, the portfolio withdrawals also are not linear because there's so many moving pieces. So in this case, we think they're going to need $63,000 of withdrawals this year. Next year, it goes up to $115,000. And that's because, again, back to the details, their income went down. She retired. There's car purchases built in. So all of that fluctuation is captured here when we calculate, the gap that has to come from the portfolio. And so I find using 1 year as an example is easier to talk through. So if we take, the first year of retirement, so she's going to retire at the end of this year. 2026 is the first official year that they are retired. And the plan says we think they're going to need about $115,000 from their portfolio to cover their spending. That is really helpful. But now the details come in of, okay, great, we need $115,000. Well, where exactly do we take it from? Well, as part of building the plan, testing for tax efficiency, all of those details, what we've come up with for them is they are each going to take some money from their traditional retirement accounts. So we have Larry taking $50,000 from his IRA. We have Ellen taking $35,000 from hers. That's a total of $85,000. And the remaining $30,000 comes out of what we call a non-retirement account. In their case, that's their joint brokerage account. And so that is what we do. Again, every year we say, well, what is the gap for the year? How do we fund that gap? What accounts exactly do we take the money out of? And what drives those decisions is the long-term tax planning that Dana mentioned a minute ago.
Yeah, and what we're seeing at the bottom here is the estimate of their asset values, assuming a linear 5% rate of return. So if I zoom back out, you'll see that their asset values, if they average about 5%, are likely to maintain themselves with this withdrawal pattern. Now, as we know, everything doesn't earn a nice, even 5% rate of return. And so one of the things that we talked about at the beginning is we all want monthly cash flow, peace of mind, but how are we going to use some assessments to determine if we are on track? And one of those assessments we use is, except I can't get my screen to go to the next screen for some reason, is the Monte Carlo. And so it is one of 3 retirement readiness tests that we've run. Now, this is what we call the, the broadest of the tests. It is not like a definitive statement on your retirement plan works or it doesn't work. And it's why we use 3 retirement readiness tests. There's some great deep dives on Michael Kitcey's website by, I believe, is it Derek Thorpe? Do you remember his name, Amy?
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah, he does a whole analysis on Monte Carlo, and basically that, people place too much weight on these probability of success. And part of that is simply, let's say you have Social Security and pensions, and you have all the income you want for 29 years of retirement, but in the 30th year, you're short by $2,000. Well, that's a failure under these probability tests. And so it doesn't really show you the magnitude of the failure. It also doesn't take into account very minor changes that you could make. So for example, if it was early in retirement and we experienced a poor sequence of investment returns, well, we went through this in 2008, and at the same time we had low inflation. And so people just didn't take the inflation raises that we had baked into their plan, and that helped this red line come back into line with longer term expectations where we needed it to be. So Monte Carlo gives you a very broad view. We like to see an 80% success rate or higher. The Kitcey's article that I'm talking about actually makes the argument that if you're doing your testing every year, you could perhaps even have a Monte Carlo result as low as 50%, as long as you were testing every year and making sure it wasn't getting worse and making adjustments along the way. But we start with this just to say, in general, does the plan work given the level of cash flow someone wants and the retirement dates that they expect to have? And if it's below 80%, then we can begin to look at modifications. Would we need to spend a little bit less? Would it make sense for someone to work a little bit longer if that were a possibility? So we can begin to discuss adjustments. However, if people start their planning far enough out, we wish everyone would start a decade out from their desired retirement date, but they don't. Most of the time we hear from them a year or 2 before they want to retire. But if they started far enough out, most plans, when we test them, 10 years out, we might see a 70% Monte Carlo. Sometimes I've even seen 60, but when they're doing the right things, every single year it improves. And then by the time they get to retirement, we're seeing them fall well within the ranges that we want to see. One of the funnest experience I ever had was someone we started 7 years out, and 3 years into the plan, their metrics looked fantastic. This person was miserable at their job, that their company had sold, and so there was new management, new requirements, and so they came in. We were only 3 years into the plan, and said, "You can retire anytime." And his eyes actually welled up with tears. It was just a wonderful thing, because at that point he was ready to be done. So just because you have a result in 1 year, right, that may not quite be where you want it, doesn't mean, oh my gosh, this is impossible. You just work towards steady progress, and we see the metrics improve. Now, Amy, this is a summary of what we looked at, but in a vertical format, we're going to try to pull it all together. Walk us through this.
Yeah, so this is another way that we illustrate the formula I talked about a minute ago. So A is non-investment income. In this case, then we have B, which are the portfolio withdrawals. That's the gap. And then when you get to C, C can be a little confusing in this example because this client is still working. So in the first year, 2025, you see that they have, all of their earnings, non-investment income A. They are taking some money from their portfolio, but she is also putting, $3,300 into her Roth 401k at work. And so when you add up all of those pieces, you get to D, which is their total cash flow for the year. And we just run that same calculation every single year. For planning purposes, it's helpful for us to see what that total annual cash flow is. But what we know clients really want to see is, well, like, what does that mean for us on a monthly basis? And so the next part of this, shows how we break that down. So what this is showing here is similar information from the last slide. It shows total outgoing cash flow of about, 170,000 a year, give or take. But in green, it shows what is the monthly amount of income. What are they building their retirement budget on if we exclude some of those lumpy expenses like, auto purchases. So this particular plan has a monthly retirement budget of about, $12,000 a month, gradually increasing with inflation.
Yeah, and this is a starting place. As Amy mentioned earlier, somebody might look at this and say, well, 30 years into my plan, I'm still going to have $2.2 million. Now that is not adjusted back to today's values for inflation, so it won't buy $2.2 million worth of goods or services. But if they did not have a legacy goal, they might say, I have this and a paid off home at that point, I'm comfortable spending a little bit more on the front end of my plan. And so we might adjust and say, well, what if they wanted to increase their vacation budget? Or they may say, we don't want to spend so much on automobiles. We often see automobile purchases, the frequency goes down in retirement. We'll often see the value of the cars people purchase go down. And not because they can't afford it, it seems that a lot of people's values change. It's not as important. They're not driving as much. So maybe they just don't place as much of a priority on that. But here, as we talked about, the goal is maintaining certainty of cash flows and having inflation built into those cash flows and being able to show someone when that funnel, that income from all those different sources comes together, what is available to spend after taxes each month. And that's what we find is really meaningful for people. And then being able to set this all up so it direct deposits into a paycheck. So there's a lot of research on annuities, Michael Finke and I believe Wade Pfau on what's called the license to spend. And it talks about people with guaranteed predictable income feel more comfortable spending. And so that can be accomplished with annuity income. A very similar structure can also be accomplished by setting up direct deposits. Once you've done this methodology, you just set up the direct deposits into your account. So it's coming in and it's like your paycheck, and it makes it a lot easier to feel comfortable spending it. Now, down the right-hand side, we have the projected asset values. Some people like a picture. Here's what their financial capital picture looks like. Each color is a different account type. When you see, for example, Larry's Roth IRA and Ellen's Roth, what happens is we have assumed that Larry passed away at 85 and that account was turned into a spousal Roth IRA. And so the value didn't disappear, it just rolled into Ellen's accounts in these two cases. But the top line trajectory is the exact same numbers on the previous slide, just in a graphic format. And that leads us to the second retirement readiness test we run. So if I go back, I'm actually going to go back a few slides to these withdrawals. And so if we were to look at all of the expected withdrawals over their retirement horizon and take the present value, what is the lump sum that I would have to have in the bank to withdraw this amount each and every year? Well, that's what we're calculating in our fundedness test. So estimated lifetime withdrawals, this 1.829 million is the present value of all of those withdrawals, assuming a 4% discount rate. So a rough way of thinking of that is assuming you could earn 4% each year. If you had 1.829 million, it would deliver those cash flows. We set up a ratio, so we compare what did they have at the beginning of the year relative to their lifetime withdrawals, and we get a fundedness ratio. We think of this as like a lifetime 4% rule. So some of the challenges with the 4% rule when you are actually at retirement is it can make people afraid to take extra money out for, maybe a vacation or a home repair or helping their kids. But that may be perfectly okay as long as they don't take that extra amount out every single year. And so by using a fundedness ratio, we can test some of those lumpier cash flows. Cash flows are rarely linear and exactly the same each year in retirement. And so it allows us to test that, and especially when you're delaying Social Security, you might need a higher withdrawal rate earlier and a lower one later, and make sure that on a lifetime basis, it's still fitting within a ratio that makes sense. We like to see this ratio come in at 110%. And again, we want to test these ratios each and every year. So it's a way of saying we want peace of mind, we want reliability of cash flow, but what are the metrics we're going to use to test the plan and make sure it is still on track to accomplish that? That leads us to the last piece, is now we have these cash flows that we've laid out. We know what we expect to have coming out of each account. How are we going to build an investment plan? And what's a bad idea is to watch the news too much in terms of your investment strategy. There may be other things to pay attention to, but in terms of making investment decisions about what you're reading, it rarely leads to good decisions. Instead, you need a defined strategy. There's discipline, there's some type of rebalancing process, there's diversification. Those are the proven strategies that help bring about reliability of your cash flow stream over time. So Amy, we start by, I know, laying it out in something that looks like this. Walk us through this.
Yep. So this is one of the pictures we looked at a minute ago. It just shows the detailed withdrawal strategy for Larry and Ellen. So we're only showing here the first 10 years, but what we've highlighted in orange is our intended income ladder. So the investment approach that we use at Sensible Money is, first step is map out the withdrawal plan. The last step is to structure the investments to match. We do that by building an income ladder, which really what that means is that we are buying bonds and CDs that are matched up to the planned withdrawals. So the last slide just showed the big picture. The slide Dana's on here shows an example of how do we take what's in the spreadsheet and then start applying it, in real life to the investments. This one is just showing big picture. They are taking withdrawals from 3 accounts. If we look at all 3 accounts mushed together, What you see are the gray bars showing, kind of lumpy withdrawals based on their expected spending needs. And that's helpful. But what's more helpful is going account by account and structuring the investments to match. This picture shows Larry's IRA. So for his withdrawal plan, for the overall withdrawal plan, the details in his account is if you go over to the right-hand side and you see it says cash flow. Well, what this is showing is for 2025, there's about $8,300. Where that comes from is we would be buying bonds and CDs that mature in future years. Those bonds and CDs pay interest. So in 2025, we don't have anything maturing, but we do have interest income coming in, from the future maturities. And then back to the plan. So the plan said we think he's going to need to take out about $50,000 a year for the first 3 years. You see that's what we have in cash flow, roughly $50,000 each year. Then his withdrawals were expected to go down to the $30,000 range. So that's what you see in 2029 and beyond. So those are the dollar amounts that match the plan. Dana was highlighting the yield. This is an example. Yields right now for bonds and CDs are roughly in the 4 to 5% range. All the way on the left where it says name, that's just an example of some of the different income sources that we would use. So we do sometimes call this income ladder a few different names. We call it an income ladder or a bond ladder. We use both bonds and CDs. So this just shows, depending on the yield and the year that we're trying to purchase that cash flow for, sometimes we use bank CDs, sometimes we use US Treasuries. Down at the bottom there, it's Federal Home Loan Bank, that's a government agency bond. And so this is just starting to get into the weeds of, okay, first we mapped out the numbers. Now we're going to pick, in this case, the safe investments to match the desired cash flows.
And Amy, that turns into an allocation. Explain kind of how that works and how it's different than maybe the way other people determine allocations.
Yeah, for us, it is really different. So, when we show somebody their asset allocation recommendation, in this case, what it shows is, this total portfolio would have about 28% in fixed income. That's the bonds and the CDs. And then the remaining 72% would go into growth. Well, where that comes from is back to their plan. We have mapped out their desired spending. Then we have mapped out the withdrawals needed to support that spending. And then the final piece is to say, well, if we want to build a, 8-year income ladder for Larry and Ellen, it would take about 28% of their portfolio to build out the income ladder that we just saw. It is specific to their cash flow. It's not just an asset allocation questionnaire that says, how much risk are you comfortable with? Or, a lot of the rules of thumb out there, there's a 60-40 split in allocation. We don't just pick an arbitrary 60-40. We pick an allocation that is going to cover your specific withdrawals. That's really what this is showing.
Yeah, and it's very different than a risk tolerance questionnaire that someone might fill out, and each account isn't allocated the same because the account's allocation is aligned to the specific cash flows of that account, yet still at a household level, we want it to come within, generally you don't want less than about 50% in equities nor more than 75%. I was on a podcast with Bill Benjen yesterday. It was super cool. For those of you who know who he is, I'd never actually gotten to interact with him before. He's got a new book coming out this August, but he was talking about how the 4% rule originally came out. And one of the things he said is all of his research showed that the amount you can withdraw in his testing, as long as you stayed within about a low end of 45% equities and a high end of about 75, it doesn't really impact things that much. And so it's just a very different process than managing for volatility. We are really managing toward creating reliable cash flows, especially on the front end of the plan. And then there's a process we use to make sure that we're continuously refilling the bucket that the cash flows are going to come out of. Now, one of the things that we look at, and this will lead to our third retirement readiness test, is we create, with the help of our investment partner, Asset Dedication, a critical path These dashed dotted white lines represent the minimum amount we would want someone to have for the cash flows to be delivered for life. And we calculate a minimum required return. So in this case, they needed a 2.74% minimum return. And that can allow someone to say, great, like I can take more risk. My required return is low. Or someone could say, wow, I could put my entire portfolio in laddered bonds. We've never had anyone do that. Most people want some exposure to potential upside, but they could and have absolutely zero risk. So it definitely gives you choices and allows you to have discussions about what we call your risk capacity, like how much risk does your plan allow you to take and still meet all of your cash flow goals. And what this critical path does is then it allows us to calculate our third retirement readiness test. This is a historical audit that basically took Larry and Ellen, their exact starting values at retirement, their cash flows from the accounts that we had projected out, and each yellow line represents a 28-year outcome. And we see, depending on when they retired, the yellow line either shot off the top of the chart, there's many of those, or in one case, this was a Great Depression retirement, the yellow line ran out of money if no adjustments had been made. And then there's a few cases out here where the yellow line finished at approximately where the values were when they started. And so it allows us to say historically what would have happened if they would have followed a particular path. Now, that is how we create a retirement income plan. We think that helps establish some best practices, some monitoring and metrics that can be used to ultimately bring about the peace of mind and the monthly income and the reliability of income that is most important. We wouldn't know how to do it by winging it or by guessing. We need a process, almost like an engineer, a structured process that we use consistently each and every year to make sure that someone's plan is on track. And what that allows us to do is to say, okay, if kind of like warning sensors that you might see in manufacturing plants, right? If something doesn't look like it's heading in the right direction, some of these yellow lines that dipped into the red here, we have time, if we're spotting this early on, to make adjustments. We have time to say, hey, let's watch your spending a little more carefully. Let's not take this year's inflation raise. If someone was overspending early in retirement, that's honestly the biggest thing we've seen that causes some concern. Then we might say, we're really gonna have to ratchet this back, or you are going to be in trouble later in retirement. So it allows a monitoring system that can spot this early on to make the changes so that nobody just wakes up one day and says, oh my gosh, how did this happen? I ran out of money. That's not the way it works. If you're monitoring it, it should never be the outcome that someone experiences. Now, with that, I know we're going to open it up to Q&A. Nancy, I have seen so many questions come flying in on my other screen.
Yes.
Some of them are very specific. You are a very engaged audience. This is amazing. So I don't even know where we start. Nancy, where do you want to start with Q&A?
Oh gosh. Well, let me come back on here. So I'll start at the bottom and kind of work my way up, because as they come piling on, let's see. All right. If Larry has supplemental Medicare insurance, would his out-of-pocket be zero?
Amy, you
Want
want to take that
one? Yep. Yeah, I saw that question come in when we were on that slide. So not usually. I mean, usually the supplemental policies aren't going to cover every single thing. One specific example we see a lot is dental. So, the supplemental plan might help minimize the medical out-of-pocket spending. But what if you are, lucky enough to need a root canal or need something like that, we always want to have extra out-of-pocket spending for dental, for vision, sometimes things like chiropractic care. Sometimes there's naturopathic doctors people want to see that aren't covered by their insurance plan. So that is why we do build in some extra medical spending buffer.
Okay. How do you calculate what you'll get for Social Security accurately?
So we actually take your earnings history, input it into a software program. We use Social Security timing. It accurately applies. We input estimates for your future earnings, and then it calculates it all out and calculates the various claiming options and provides a recommended solution. We also have the ability to model out, all kinds of potential claiming strategies, and then build it into your plan and have some conversations around pros and cons and which one is likely to fit your situation best.
Can you use RMDs for your gap once you hit 73, or for some people 75?
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
you definitely
certainly.
can. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dana.
I mean, yeah, RMDs for most of the people, not everyone, most of the clients that we end up working with, we find that by the time they're going to have to take required minimum distributions, oftentimes the amount required is more than they need. And so that's why in many of the plans, I saw the question come in about how did we decide how much to take out of the IRA for the Roth, for example. And actually, I have that slide. It was a lot of numbers, so we didn't use it in the main presentation, but you will see this effective tax rate. So we are projecting out someone's effective tax rate, and then if there's years where this tax rate is lower and it's expected to be higher later, well, then we want to, increase the amount of taxable income in the years where it's lower. And so that is how we're kind of deciding, what should come out. And so it's not always the case that someone should wait till 73 or 75 to take those required distributions. Sometimes it actually helps the plan last longer by reducing their lifetime tax liability if they take some of that money out sooner.
Dana, your thoughts on purchasing an annuity to cover the gap?
Yeah, I think an annuity, I don't like it as all-in-one, it's going to cover the entire gap. I think annuities are a great solution built into part of a plan. And I think sometimes we begin to think of things as like this or that, but it doesn't have to be. An annuity is fabulous at guaranteeing lifetime income. It's not inflation adjusted. Social Security is called the best annuity you can buy in town because it guarantees lifetime income and is inflation adjusted. So there's a hierarchy you want to apply to how you make these decisions. But when you're looking at income for life, the challenge with an income annuity is it's not going to be inflation adjusted. So could it cover a portion of the essential expenses, giving you a nice floor, supplementing your Social Security? Absolutely. Would I want to annuitize everything? Since it's not inflation adjusted, your best way to give yourself the potential of keeping up with inflation is still to maintain some equity exposure. And so I wouldn't look at it as a all-in-one, like that's how I'm going to cover the entire thing, but I think it's a fabulous solution when it's built into part of the plan.
Okay, there was just a question on, yes, the slides. The slides won't be available necessarily as a standalone, but the whole webinar will be, and so people can always screenshot if they would like slides. So, what rate is more important to focus on when planning, the effective rate or the marginal rate?
Definitely say the effective rate is far more important because it tells the whole story. The marginal rate only tells, the very tip-top dollar of tax that you paid. An extreme example, you might be $10 over the next tax bracket. It's going to say you're in, a 32% tax bracket, but you only paid 32% on $10 in that case. The effective rate really is, it's the whole picture.
In the distribution plan, you chose the traditional IRA. You chose the traditional IRAs. Every time a new question comes in, it gets bumped down. You chose the traditional IRAs and the non-retirement account. Why not use only the traditional IRAs for the distribution to minimize RMDs?
So this, first of all, was not a tax optimized plan. You know, we put the numbers in as a sample. There are cases where it would all come from the IRA. Now, we look at how we're going to fill up to certain tax brackets and how does it impact the Medicare Part B and D premiums. So there's all kinds of things that we would look at, but don't consider this isn't meant to be an optimal plan that you should go out and follow. It's a sample of how you lay out a retirement income plan. And for each person, those decisions do get optimized on a year-by-year basis. You're rarely going to get it to be exact. And so that's a whole nother conversation. But, you know, think about your checking account, for example. Let's say you have a direct deposit coming from your IRA. Well, your spending may go $5,000 over what you had coming in. Well, that's going to come out of your checking account, which in a sense came out of your non-IRA account. So there's always some spending when we're running it in a software model. Like, it's got to account for every dollar. And if I didn't program it to come out of the IRA, it's going to take it from somewhere. So that's kind of a convoluted answer, but that's how it works.
It's a complete answer.
It's a complete answer.
How are you compensated? Do you require to have assets under your management? Do you have, or do you do a comprehensive retirement plan around non-financial issues? If so, are you experienced with solo agers and their special needs?
Amy, you want to take that one? You want me to?
Yep. So we do a standalone plan. We don't require assets under management to do a plan. We charge a flat fee for a plan. It's either $6,900 or $8,900, depending on the complexity. And then, yes, we do work with single individuals. We do have some clients. I don't know if I understand that correctly, Nancy, but was that a special needs planning question?
I think it's just the unique needs of single individuals.
Yep.
Versus couples.
Yes, we do not only work with couples. As Dana said, this was an example. I have lots of couples clients, but I work with lots of single clients as well. And absolutely, the planning considerations are different. So we do address all of those different needs.
Larry and Ellen's spreadsheet, maintaining its value is nice, but shouldn't they be spending it down as they age?
Well, that would be a choice that Larry and Ellen had that we mentioned, right? Each person's going to choose a little differently. But absolutely, if they wanted to spend down a little more rapidly, then we could build that plan. But we have to start with an iteration of the plan and then, you know, modify it based on feedback from the individual.
What about couples with no children? Do you do plans for them? We do plans for all kinds of folks.
I'm a couple with no children. So
grandkids,
yes, we do.
People with grandkids, yeah. Is a look back for success tax? Oh, sorry, this is part of a two-part question that got separated. So let's go to another one. How about purchasing a long-term care or hybrid early in retirement when you're healthy? Where does this fit in a retirement plan?
Yeah, that's actually one I'm working on with a few clients right now. So the earlier, the better. One kind of helpful nugget of information I always find helpful when it comes to long-term care and annuities. With long-term care, earlier is better. And with annuities, sometimes later is better. You know, the longer you wait, usually the more guaranteed income you get from a lump sum, payment. But yes, long-term care planning is something we look at. It's something we evaluate as part of that second retirement readiness test. And, we look at how, are your assets enough to potentially support a long-term care event? And if not, is getting a long-term care policy and paying the premiums, is that something that could help improve the metrics of your plan?
Another question. You mentioned, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just had a question pop up that I happened to see that I have to read because I love it. And it says, what if your client isn't sure how much they want to spend in retirement and changes their mind later? Maybe they want to spend more. How do you accommodate that? I love this question because clients always change their mind. Like,
Right.
I mean, sometimes, we've been discussing what we call the flexible framework, right? Like we lay this out as an iteration or as a starting point. I'm probably using my words backwards. We lay it out as a starting point and then we iterate. I'll get those in the right order. And so those iterations happen either from market conditions, from changing tax rules, or most often from changing things from the client, right? They want to spend more, they want to buy an auto, they want to help this child, or they want to buy long-term care, or they want to move. There's all kinds of changes. Amy, I know you deal with this all the time. Thoughts on it?
Yes, sometimes, oftentimes it's me trying to encourage them to go do the things that they want to do. But like other examples that pop into my head are, um, two clients recently have wanted to help their adult children buy a home. And it's like, well, we planned for it, but we didn't know exactly when it was going to happen. In one case, the adult child ended up buying a condo that was way less expensive, and the parent had planned to, give a decent amount of money, but instead they, only needed $10,000 to help buy new appliances. So then there was extra money available for other things. And so I always try to say that this retirement plan, especially with us, it's a partnership. It's an ongoing conversation. There's things that are always changing, and that is expected. I don't think there's ever been a single plan I've seen that it's what we laid out, that's what actually happens. There's always movement.
I always say that during the planning process, where we start is not necessarily where we're going to end up. So just even going through the strategy 1, 2, and 3, things change. Things change a lot as people understand options and what they can do. And so that's why it's always exciting. And let's see. So a question came up about Medicare, and it has to do with I'm so sorry, forgive me. Hopefully Leah can edit this out while I try to find these. Can you speak to the point in the slides about look back from age 63 for Medicare? I also heard there's a look back for success tax if you sell your primary home after age 63.
The first part I can answer. There is a 2-year Medicare look back. It's always 2 years. So the way I like to explain it is like the year you turn 65 and start Medicare, they look back at your tax return from when you were 63. The following year, you're 66, they look back at your taxes from when you were 64. So a question I have heard more than once is somebody says, well, I'm 65 and my income when I was 63 was really high. Am I stuck at that like forever? The answer is no. It is an ongoing process. There is always that 2-year look back. The success test, or what did you say, Nancy? That is not something I don't know if I understand.
A success tax, and it may be just referring to having, like, it's not actually
success
a tax, but it's just like an extra cost. Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Well, that is what the Medicare adjustments are. It is you have to pay more for your Medicare premiums if you appear financially successful on your tax return. I think maybe that's what it meant. Is yes, the higher your income is, the more potentially you pay for Medicare.
Yeah, and the stats are,
go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, the stats are, I think it's about 5% of the population is subject to those what are called IRMA, income related monthly adjustment amount premiums for Part B and D. So I guess it is a success tax. One way of looking at it is if you're lucky enough to be in that 5%, you are paying, we'll call it a success tax. I kind of like that phrase.
What would you recommend for someone who has no spouse and no children with regard to finding someone to act as a POA, healthcare proxy, paying bills, etc.? Should I become incompetent or dementia set in? And I will just say this comes up with some frequency. This question.
This is a challenging one. And so we have tried to search for various fiduciaries, either our fiduciary or trustee services that you can engage. And it's not easy to find. I have seen many people start a fiduciary service, and we develop a relationship, we think they're wonderful, and then a decade later, they're no longer running that service. So I think the big challenge is you might find some wonderful solutions in this area, and then when you actually need that person to step in, if that's 15 or 20 years later, right, is that company or that service still going to be available? I have found this to be a challenge. Nancy, Amy, anything you have found as, great solutions? I don't think any of us have found great solutions to this.
Not great solutions, but boy, important to it's important to start working on it and try to get some things lined up early, as early as possible. Oftentimes, friends or friends of friends who are in a similar situation may have some ideas that comes up. There are always professional trustees. But
I've seen several clients looking at corporate trustees. I've yet to have somebody actually go through the experience of using them. A success story that doesn't mean this would ever be successful for everybody. I do have one situation. A client of mine actually was the power of attorney for her single elderly neighbor. It worked out well because the client of mine happens to be an honest, trustworthy person, and so she did right by her neighbor. But that's a very tough thing to plan for.
Yep, it's a great question. And if there was a business that could come about and solve this problem, we are not allowed, for example, to be trustees or power of attorneys on behalf of our clients, but it'd be interesting to see a business come along that solved for that problem. I'm sure it wouldn't be inexpensive because they would be having to maintain a staff of people that could do this and may need to act at any time.
Yeah. So we're getting a series of questions around our services, how to inquire about them, what the process is, and so forth. So rather than do all of those individually, this one kind of captures, I think, the bulk of the questions. So if we do not wish to use your full services and manage our accounts, the initial fee for a financial plan is a one-time snapshot of financial picture, regardless of future changes. So that's kind of one set of questions. And then another is, what can you do for me essentially, or what would the planning be like? So I don't know if you want to talk about the introductory meeting or that process.
So if you visit our website, I might be able to just pull it up. We'll see if this works. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
And you'll see a schedule a consult button. If you fill that out, there's a set of questions that come in. They are designed so that we don't ask you any confidential information. For example, we might ask you your age, but not your date of birth. So they were intentionally designed. They all are encrypted. Those questions actually come right into Amy. Amy knows all our planners and goes through and sets up, who we think would be the best fit for you. We set up a complimentary introductory meeting. It typically runs about an hour to an hour and a half. We are not high pressure sales pitch, so it's truly a conversation where we can explain in a more personalized way, what is it that we do, how long does it take, what's involved. So that would be my suggestion for those who are seriously interested. You haven't committed to anything but about an hour of your time to a conversation. So it can be a great way to learn more. Also on our website, if you go to the services page, which I'm pulling up, you can go to the financial planning, the juicing plan. So all of our clients start with a juicing plan. You can read more about that. A pretty significant percentage that come through that juicing plan at some point then move into what we call juicing plus, where we run the plan every single year and manage the assets. And there's a framework that we use when we go through that planning process, but it is, one of our values is out with the cookie cutter because every household is different. We've had some great questions about single households on this webinar. We've had questions about, the success tax. There's other people who, might never be part of the success tax, but they're still can value, their plan could get a tremendous amount of value from this process. So everybody's different. And that's why I think that introductory meeting can allow you to have a more personalized conversation in terms of what is it, would you be a good candidate? We want to help people where we can add value. So we are looking for people that we do think it makes sense. We don't want to try to talk you into doing a plan if we think that we're not going to be able to help you at all.
I would say just about everybody can benefit from a juicing plan, and then, juicing plus is, if it makes sense. So I'm going to ask this one, and it's an opportunity, I think, to talk more about the value. Isn't 6,900 very steep for a juicing plan?
Well, it's all relative. I'm in the midst of doing a potential big home remodel, and when I look at what we've paid our architect so far, it's significantly more than $6,900, and it's a foundation that's got to last for a long time. And so the decision on retirement is, for most people, the biggest financial decision that you ever make. And we started off pricing lower, and we were losing money. So when we looked at the amount of time and the amount of detail and the amount of questions that people had and the amount of education that we needed to provide to sufficiently answer those questions, we actually sat down at one point and said, well, in order to keep our pricing here, what should we take out? Should we ignore taxes? Should we ignore the investment? Should we not talk about healthcare? Should we not look at, guaranteed? Like, what are the pieces that we could leave out in order to charge less? And so that's where we landed. We feel like our pricing is very fair. It is actually, in some cases still takes far longer than you would think. One of the challenges we've found is that a lot of the software programs that many planners use will spit out a general answer like a probability of success, but they don't have the capabilities to get down to the level of detail that we find most people want and need as they're transitioning to retirement. And so because we use a very customizable model, that takes more time. And so our choices are, either don't customize it, make everyone fit in this kind of box and cover less, and then we could charge less. So that's the answer that we landed on as a firm. We don't feel good about the work that we do unless we cover all of the things that we think it's important to cover when we're doing a plan.
Who do you not make sense for? I made this. I think I said, we're just about everybody. It's like, who would we not make sense for, as either a plan or full service?
Generally, as you get into ultra high net worth, people that have financial assets, and it's not always an asset number, but let's say we're talking 25 million or more. And the reason I say it's not always an asset number is sometimes people at higher net worths are wanting to spend enough that we still add a tremendous amount of value in our planning. Certainly, as you get to asset levels of 50 or 100 million or more, household needs change, and those aren't good clients for us. Generally, if there's $500,000 of assets or less, our pricing is maybe not going to be affordable. We might not be able to add enough value for it really to make sense. And so that's a pretty broad range, but within that, we find that the feedback, you can go to Google and read the reviews. We also send surveys after every juicing plan, and we just had on an anonymous basis, we had AI compile all the results of those surveys, and it is just phenomenal. Like, 98% of people say it was, worth their time, the best experience they ever had, the amount of peace of mind, what they learned from the process. So clearly, for people who are looking for peace of mind, that's what we're looking to deliver, is a lot of education. So you're learning about all of this in a personalized way.
I can add something to that too, Dana. One of the things I think of, of clients who aren't the best fit for us are people who are looking for just like they want the best returns. That's their primary goal. So I want to make sure I can beat the market, or I want to make sure I like have a very active strategy. We are very active planners, but the key is the word plan. It is for us always comprehensive. And so sometimes I've had people ask me that, oh, why wouldn't I be a good fit? And I said, oh, well, if you told me like you want us to guarantee you're going to get this rate of return, or, guarantee that you're always going to beat the market, like we aren't the best fit for that. Our approach is not that.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if people are like, well, how come we're not allocating to gold right now? Or why don't we own Nvidia stock? That was the one a few years ago. Or, why don't we own more crypto? Or, there's all kinds of questions over the years that people want to know, like, why aren't we constantly changing the strategy? Well, because the data that we've studied definitively proves that is likely to hurt you more than help you. And so people who are looking for more of a stock broker, that would be, somebody constantly recommending the latest potential new investment. That is not us.
What are the professional designations behind your names?
I like that question. Amy, you have a lot of them, so we'll start with you.
Yeah. So at Sensible Money, all of us as planners, we do all have the CFP designation, that's Certified Financial Planner. The best way I can explain that one is it's a rigorous designation to earn. Most people, it takes at least a year or two to get it, but it is a foundational designation. It covers all areas of comprehensive financial planning. Another one, Dana and I both are CFPs. We also both have the RMA designation. That one's Retirement Management Advisor. That one is specific to the work we do, so retirement planning. The CFP gives us the foundation to know all topics of personal finance. The RMA really focuses on what we call the decumulation strategy, which is what Sensible Money does. I have a couple other ones. The one I actually love the most is a designation. It's called BFA, stands for Behavioral Financial Advisor. I did that 11 or 12 years ago. It was one of the very first tests I did in this industry. And what I love about it is it's not focused on the analytics and the numbers, but it focuses on, at the end of the day, all of us, we go to work and we accumulate money to help us live our lives. And our behaviors, our values, all of that really influences the way we deal with our money. And so I think that designation helps bridge the gap between the analytics and what somebody really is trying to accomplish in their life.
You are an extraordinary communicator, Amy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Some feedback, yeah.
Yeah, and the other designation, it's not really a designation, but you may see me, I don't know where it might say it, probably on my bio on the website, Colby Certified Consultant. So Colby is an assessment tool that I came across in 2011, became certified. We use it in a lot of our team building, training, hiring, but it basically tells us in a nutshell how we best problem solve. So what's our natural instinctive way of approaching problem solving? And so it's something I've found very, very valuable in my professional career.
I've always handled my own portfolio. Could you handle half and I'll continue with my own?
So we have had some higher net worth clients start and have us handle a portion of the portfolio. I have several of those now that are entering their mid 70s, and they are slowly consolidating everything with us. So we do see people, in cognitive decline, and in their 70s, their desire or to do any of this changes. And so we have had relationships like that. I will tell you, it is harder for us to do accurate planning. We constantly are having to get data on what's happening inside your outside accounts and match that up with what's happening here. When it comes tax time, we're doing tax projections for our clients and often recommending, the amount of quarterly payments or tax withholding. And so we are constantly having to get the data from the other accounts. And so it entails more work. And so on the cases where we do that, if you don't get us the data that we need, then we may decide that relationship doesn't work so well. So we like to do good work, and we need people who are willing to get us the data if we're going to do something like that.
Can we just withdraw from my IRAs and withdraw from my younger wife's IRAs in the future? If both, what is the advantage?
I actually thought about that for the sample plan we created because a lot of times we do that. Not always, like in an example like the one today, sometimes we have couples that, it's a second marriage and they want to keep things equal. They don't want to just take from one or the other. But in a lot of situations, we do something like that where we might take all withdrawals from the older spouse's IRA to help reduce their RMDs, which are going to come first. So that is definitely one of the considerations to think through.
So one of our attendees shared a website. It's called Find a Guardian.
Ooh.
And the web address is guardianship.org. So let me take out the rest of that. So guardianship.
I'm pulling it up for you guys. I'll see if I can spell it correctly.
Guardianship.org. And then there's, what is guardianship more? I'm trying to think that she shared a page that kind of got more into how to find one, finding a guardian.
Okay. Love it. Thank you so much for sharing this resource. This is fabulous. I love it when we can all learn from each other.
Yeah, that's appreciated. So what percentage of 401k is mandatory to take out? So I'm assuming that's just the RMDs at some point.
Yeah, it's based on there's a life expectancy calculator. So RMDs, required minimum distributions, there is a formula for the IRS that tells you exactly you have to do the formula to figure out what the dollar amount is.
How long does sorry, I want to add to that. Just every once in a while misconceptions. So every once in a while we'll come across people who think if they move money from a 401k to an IRA that it's taxable. And it's just one of those odd misconceptions. So I'll throw it out there, like you can roll over a 401k to an IRA. That is not a taxable event. There's reasons in some cases, if you're not yet 59 and a half, where you would not want to do that. Once you're past 59 and a half, if all of your funds are in a 401k, they will make you take pro rata distributions in almost every case, meaning I think we just had one recently, a client who tried to withdraw money from a 401k and they were like, I couldn't just take it out of the money market or just out of the bond. They didn't want to take it out of the stock portion because the stock portion was but
they couldn't pick the tax withholding. It had to be, I just had one with the 401k. It was a mandatory, I think 20% federal tax withholding. This client was only in a 12% tax bracket. So they had to have more tax withheld than they were going to need, which ended up getting them a big refund, but not ideal.
Yeah, so just know there are some administrative reasons that sometimes it can make your life easier to roll that 401k to an IRA. The 401k may change plan providers. It can go through a blackout period. There can be all kinds of things that we've seen happen that have nothing to do with the actual investments, but just can make it administratively easier for someone if the funds are in an IRA, especially as they get close to required minimum distribution age.
Can you discuss the benefits of modern risk-based guardrails as an income strategy?
I think, Dana, did you just do a video on that topic? That sounds familiar to me.
I don't know if I've heard that specific term, so I would need to know more. I mean, I can tell you what comes to my mind when I think of modern risk-based guardrails. It would be, if I were to go back, and let me see if I can get back to this drawing on the screen. It would be somewhat, having lower guardrails on all of these squiggly lines that we're looking at and saying, if the portfolio drops below a certain threshold amount, what actions are we going to take? So that's what I would think of. That's what comes to my mind. If the person who asked that question wants to put in some more context, I just haven't heard that exact term. But in a sense, that's what we do. This set of dashed white lines you're looking at would be your personalized benchmark. And then we're basing decisions based on whether you're ahead or below that benchmark. And those decisions may involve portfolio decisions, such as when we're selling growth. They may involve spending decisions, such as we're going to forego your inflation raise, or we're going to put off that big expense that you were considering. So we do use that type of guardrail system, but it's personalized to each household.
Dana mentioned the values of the portfolio. Oh, this is specific to a slide, sorry. Mentioned that the values of the portfolio in the right column is an inflation adjustment, but isn't it accounted for by using the 5% estimated real growth against the inflation adjusted expenses?
Well, so the value of the portfolio, right? The cash flows are inflation adjusted, right? We're increasing cash flows so that what someone needs to spend, they should be able to maintain their purchasing power. But yes, in the background, this account is averaging 5% a year, but we're withdrawing a lot of that. And so the actual values are maintaining themselves. But if I were to take this $2.2 million 29 years in the future and take that into a present value, what is it actually worth today? It's going to come in at less than $1 million. I could do the math on my HP 12C calculator app in a few minutes. But yeah, so that's what we mean. Like that 2.2 million, that is really, you don't really care for yourself because you're passing it along. But it can get you to think differently. Like you go, oh, well, I'm still going to have $2.2 million left, right, in 30 years. But keep in mind, it's not the same as having $2.2 million today. So that's why I wanted to make that statement. It's not equivalent. What we're solving for is that your cash flow needs are able and your purchasing power is able to be maintained.
How are you calculating the amount to pull from qualified accounts early on versus brokerage?
Amy?
It's the primary driver is tax, so the effective tax rate, but also Medicare premiums. Those are the two biggest factors. We look at those both in the current year and then throughout retirement. So it's a lifetime strategy on tax efficiency, and we tend to think of the higher Medicare premiums as a success tax, as somebody said. So it's really looking to optimize those over the course of your retirement.
Yeah, and to add to that, every number that we change in the plan will impact this fundedness ratio. And so if we were trying to decide this year, should I take $50,000 out of this account I'm going to need to realize $10,000 of capital gains, or should I take it out of the IRA? We can plug both those options into the model and it projects it out, over your lifetime and say, okay, did this series of decisions improve this metric or not? And oftentimes we will get down to what we call red, yellow, green. So there's a clear distinction in the metrics. Green, you need to do it this way, right? Or that definitely makes things look worse. Red, don't do that. It looks worse. But many of it falls into the yellow. And when it falls into the yellow, we're having a more nuanced level of discussion around, liquidity, other potential tax impacts in the future, maybe changing tax rates, because we have to base the model on the way tax rates are today. And so when it's a yellow decision, then we start talking more about your values. So we can quantify the numbers, but then what's most important to you? And that can often help sway even tax decisions one way or the other.
Okay, we have a question about your book, Dana. So did Dana write a book that explains all of the details for learning purposes? And maybe you also want to talk about your, actually, I really appreciated your explanation in our team meeting about, why not continue with an updating of Control Your Retirement Destiny. So I don't know if you want to share that.
I will share that. So yes, I wrote Control Your Retirement Destiny in 2012 and wrote a second version in 2016. And on these webinars for years, you wonderful people will often ask me when I am working on the next one. And I have started at least 3 or 4 times. Nancy even did a massive amount of editing work for me on one of them. And each time a new set of required minimum distribution rules or tax law changes was about to come out. And I did a very thorough case study that we followed, kind of like we did here today, throughout this book to illustrate all of these concepts. And so it takes a tremendous amount of work to put all of that together. And then every time they changed it, it's like, well, it's going to be outdated as soon as I publish it. And at the same time, Wade Pfau began writing his retirement planning guidebook, which is incredibly comprehensive for all of those who want to know all the detailed rules. Like it's phenomenal in terms of a resource or a reference book for all of that. So, and he publishes a new edition every year. And he is an academic, and bless him, I am so grateful that he does this so that I don't need to write that book again. And so I began working on a new book finally. I'm 20,000 words in. It's called Living Off Your Acorns, Your Guide to the 4 Phases of Retirement, where I talk about the pre-go phase, the go-go, the slow-go, the no-go. And each is almost like a little mini book specific to the decisions we see. We tell lots of stories. I've changed all identifying information, but these are all real life scenarios we've encountered that I share throughout the book and really talk about the concepts that need to be applied. Because whatever the rules are, I can tell you the rules are going to change. That's the reality. And so your planning has to evolve as the rules change, and as your goals change, you are going to change too. Rarely do people retire and everything, as Amy said, goes exactly as they laid it out. Their values change, priorities, needs, all kinds of things change.
Yep. And back when you wrote it, when you wrote that initial edition, there wasn't anything like that.
There wasn't. And so I was in the very first class that went through the retirement management advisor designation in 2010. And I felt like the entire industry was doing it wrong. They were so focused on accumulation, they were missing all of these key components. And so I wrote that book to lay out, what does this look like when you do it right? And since then, the industry has come far. And I feel like I've had an influence on that, and I'm very grateful for that. The planning tools have gotten better. The planners today have gotten better. There's financial planning college focuses now, degrees that you can get. The whole industry has come so far. It's really wonderful to see. And so I'm glad to see that. It still has a long ways to go. There are still the bulk of the industry that are stuck in what I call accumulation thinking. But it has definitely come a long ways.
Yep. I've over 30 years in financial services, I've seen a lot of change and a lot of good momentum. So this is it's exciting. Let's see. How do you budget for Roth conversions? Is it just adding the taxes to be paid each year for the conversion amount?
Amy?
It is part of it. So what Dana mentioned a minute ago, that when we change anything in the model, it changes everything else. Sometimes I think of it like a financial planner's Rubik's Cube. So if you change a Rubik's Cube, all the colors around it change. That's the exact same with the planning process. I heard somebody once say it's like a bowl of spaghetti. If you stick your fork in and twist it, all the noodles move. It's the same thing. So when we build in a Roth conversion, that impacts taxes. That could potentially impact the Medicare premiums. And so all of that gets captured as we're building the plan. And, kind of a general guideline is we typically try to make sure the taxes for the Roth conversion can get paid out of a non-IRA account, but like everything, it's not always that way. Sometimes the taxes do come out of the account that the Roth conversion happened in. So it is a case by case basis.
Yeah, and specifically around the budgeting for it, yes. So if we know the tax bill is going to be X because we are going to be doing a Roth conversion, we've had to plan out where that cash is going to come from as part of the overall budget. So it is part of the budgeting process. We also have to plan when they need to make it. And so, for example, when you're working, taxes are withheld right from your paycheck in most cases, unless you're self-employed. When you're retired, well, your taxes can vary a lot, especially while you're in that opportunity phase. And so each year you have to decide, are you withholding directly from an IRA? Or are you making quarterly payments? If you did a Roth conversion in the beginning of the year and you didn't pay taxes until tax filing timeline, you would have, in most cases, underpayment penalties. And so the timing of when you have to make those payments also has to be considered.
So I just answered some questions about Dana. Maybe you could mention the name of Wade's book again, because we've had a couple of those. Is it Retirement Guidebook?
This is not the latest version, but it is the Retirement Planning Guidebook. And
okay.
so this is what it looks like. And he did just come out with the latest 2025 edition, if everyone can see on the camera. So.
What do you think about income ETFs? And there's a list of them provided. Many of these pay higher income rates than typical dividend stocks.
What are some of the names on the list?
So SCHD, JEPI, JEPQ. So these would be like probably high yield. I don't recognize any of them, but maybe high yield.
Yeah, I don't know without looking up those symbols. They are either a kind of a hybrid of income and growth mixed into one. So kind of in one ticker symbol, they may be trying to do what we're trying to do. Or as Nancy mentioned, they could own like high yielding securities, or some funds will follow like a dividend maximization strategy where they'll try to time the buy and sell of stocks, for example, to get 5 quarters of dividends. There's some interesting strategies out there, but we'd have to look at each one to offer any thoughts.
So Dana, I don't know if you want what you're able to maybe share about your trip to New York with your fellow retirement decumulation geek friends, but this question is about. There are new products on the market, and it names a company. There are ETFs with bond ladders wrapped. There are ETFs with bond ladders wrapped in ETFs that pay a monthly income. So that aside, what are your thoughts on changes in the industry to make income easier for retirees?
I'm all for it. Some of the bond, I haven't seen necessarily some of the funds that are designed for monthly income. I used to deep dive on some. Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab all had retirement income funds. The industry, the things that we're more familiar with are bullet shares, which are packages of bonds that all mature at the same time. I can tell you each strategy has its pros and its cons. Mm-hmm. Certain players in the market that I trust, Dimensional Funds, is looking at some very unique structures that they may come out with regarding retirement income. I don't know what I'm allowed to share about my visit to New York City, so I'm not going to share much. But it's also a large company that's looking at coming up with some personalized solutions. And so I think all of it's great. The devil's in the details of understanding how those products are structured, what it exactly they're trying to do, and you have to dive into each one, look under the hood, and understand the mechanics of what's happening. How are they creating that income, and what might be the risks associated with it?
Yep. I know you've seen, and I've seen over the years, all kinds of products coming out that will solve whatever the issue is, but sometimes, and they do sometimes, but there are trade-offs, and we talk about that all the time with clients. There are trade-offs. So,
yes,
I think we've kind of covered questions about are we going to be moving into a recession? How do we protect ourselves from it? Social Security is a question for some folks.
Yeah, those are two great questions. I think we could probably, each one of us, offer some brief thoughts on that. But first one on the recession, we take the position that we're always about to enter a recession. And so the reality is when it comes to your retirement plan, like that can and will happen. And so we want to know we have a plan in place. And so that's what that bond ladder is doing. And just because there's an economic recession, it doesn't always tie hand in hand with a stock market or a portfolio recession. All portfolios are not created equal. And so to me, a plan that assumes there's no recession is not a good plan. And a plan that says, hey, at any time a recession could start, if we want to know it's not going to disrupt our cash flow and it's not going to disrupt when we need to retire, that is a good plan. Now, on the kind of adding another layer of risk, if you're still working, probably the biggest risk to a recession is that your employment could end sooner. And research shows that most, a significant percentage of retirees end up retiring sooner. They had, for example, planned to work to 65 or 67, and they find that their employment ends earlier. And so I think that is a good reason to start your planning ahead of time. If you have a plan in place and something like that comes along, it's a lot easier to iterate and say, well, here's what I was going to do, but now I've already started this process. Let's regroup and come up with plan B. The second, the Social Security question, all of us here, we're at conferences regularly. I was at a conference in Coronado at the beginning of March of 2025 that 2 ex-deputy directors from Social Security were on a panel. Everybody we hear from says the same thing. There is a substantial amount of things that can be done to bring the system back into solvency. There's no motivation for Congress to act politically with any sense of urgency. This happened in 1983 when it came right down to the wire. There was political motivation. They acted. They put the items in place to bring the system back into solvency for 50 years. 1983 to about 2032, that is that 50-year time horizon that they implemented in 83, and that they expect something similar will happen again. We all wish that they would act now so there was more certainty, but nobody actually thinks that is going to happen. But everybody who's part of that system or has been seems to feel very confident that politically across the aisle there is it's not a benefit that's up for being cut, right? There's a lot of if there's anything that people have consensus over, it's that Americans want to maintain and keep their Social Security, and so there is the consensus that it will be solved, and there's numerous ways to solve it, and some combination of those will get put in place, most likely, unfortunately, at the last minute. Nancy, Amy, anything either of you would add to the recession question or the Social Security question?
Not really. We are prepared for anything. I mean, what I sometimes will say to folks is it's not a question of if the wheels come off. It's when they're going to at some point. So that's why we have the income ladder, and that's there are things that we can't control, markets being one of them, but we can manage our income ladder, manage expenses, and whatever happens is going to happen. So, yeah. Which is it's not to say like, whatever, we don't think about it. We do. We all think about it all the time. We talk amongst ourselves all the time. We talk to clients all the time. It's more of just a recognition that this is a reality. If if someone doesn't want any kind of market volatility or risk, then don't be in the market. That's really the only way to kind of avoid that altogether. But again, that's why we have the income ladder, so that those cash flows are available. Retirement life goes on. So.
Yeah, we talk about the income ladder. It's more of a risk mitigation technique. I mean, it is an investment technique, but we think of it as risk mitigation. We don't know what the risks are going to be. Is it going to be another world war? We've had those before. Is it going to be a pandemic? There's always things coming out of left field that we don't know what is going to cause the most recent wheels falling off, but something inevitably will. And on Social Security too, yeah, I always just think like I feel confident my own Social Security will be there for the reasons Dana mentioned. I think for my kids, their retirement age might not be 67. For them, maybe it's 68 or 69, but they're single digit kids. They got a lot of time to plan for it. So I think that I feel confident that we will have time to plan for whatever those changes are. They're not going to impact the people who are in retirement or close to retirement, most likely.
I don't know if y'all want to scan what the remaining questions are. I think they've been addressed by and largely.
I did see one on I saw one on Social Security taxation. Somebody asked about withholding from Social Security specifically. I thought that was a good question because we do a lot of tax planning. And so, one of our philosophies across the board is simplicity. And when I think of taxes, they're anything but simple. But one way you can make them simpler is to try to have tax withholding come from only one source. And so, like the answer of should it come from Social Security? Well, maybe for some people, it does make sense to have taxes withheld from Social Security. For other people that are taking IRA withdrawals, it could be easier to just have no taxes on Social Security and have all your tax withholding come from one IRA tax withholding. So it's another one of those nuanced things that really depends on each person's plan.
Actually, there is one that I think would be it's a little different from some of the others that have come up. 72% of the portfolio, this is the Larry and Ellen, was allocated to growth. Can you discuss the composition of that portion of the portfolio?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the composition is typically a blend of exchange traded funds we use dimensional funds primarily and not exclusively, because sometimes people own existing funds like Vanguard or Fidelity that fit into the portfolio. There would be tax reasons not to sell them, but the distribution gives you exposure to about 12,000 stocks worldwide. Now, one of our advisors, Oscar, just did an analysis on I believe it was like Vanguard Prime Cap Fund, which had maybe 182 holdings. And so we were looking at that relative to a portfolio that had 12,000 worldwide stocks. Now, there's pros and cons. The particular equity structure that we use is designed around a concept that Asset Dedication uses. It's their models called Minimax. Minimax is designed to look at what allocation held up the best under a worst case scenario. Thus, my comment, we're always expecting a recession, right, is to say, well, what mix held up best? Now, if you get a great case scenario, you're going to leave usually some growth on the table. So for the last 2 years where the S&P did really well, our portfolios lagged if you were just comparing it to the S&P. If you were comparing it against your personal benchmark, you were fine. But this year, the headlines are screaming about everyone's down. What should I do with my 401k? And almost all our portfolios are either at break even or ahead. So we're not seeing that downside volatility. And so there are always trade-offs in how a portfolio is constructed. And that's why if you think anyone can constantly adjust the portfolio to manage against all of that, then truly that's how you spot scams, is when people are promising you that. But you do have to clearly decide what are you trying to solve with your portfolio structure. And a portfolio structure designed to maximize returns is very different than a portfolio structure designed, in our case, to say, what is likely to hold up the best in a worst case scenario. So they're just different ways of solving, you're actually solving a different math problem.
Maybe one more, and
again, and then we're at 2 hours, so we'll wrap up.
Again, unless there's one that you see that I may have missed here. How much do you suggest be kept in cash?
Yeah.
Love that question.
We just
Amy?
talked about that yesterday, Dana. It's another one that it depends on each person. So in retirement, it is different than when you're working. I do think rules of thumb, like for those that are working, the typical recommendation to have, 3 to 9 months of cash for emergencies is helpful because at that phase of your life, your cash is to protect you from losing your job. In retirement, and in particular in retirement using an approach like ours, where we have your cash flows mapped out by maturing income, there's not as much of a mathematical need to have as much cash. So we don't think you necessarily need that 6 month emergency fund. However, we always try to phrase things as like there's the math and then there's the emotion. I find with a lot of clients, the math says they don't need to have a lot of cash on hand, but there is like psychological benefits to having cash, not under a mattress, but in a savings account or even in a checking account. And so what I generally see is like I have some clients, they like, ten or $20,000 in their bank account just as a buffer. That's enough comfort for them. I have other clients that their number is 100,000. They want $100,000 in the bank, and they know that it's maybe not the most optimal place for their money, but it gives them peace of mind. So there is a wide range of what our recommendation is. It's a combination of does the math work and do you feel good about it? As long as the answer to both of those is yes, then it's probably the right answer for you. I don't know, Dana, if you had anything to add.
I will add that when you're using an income ladder structure and those bonds mature, we in the last few years have had to completely revamp our process to make sure that that money is instantly invested in a money market fund. And then we're drawing out of that fund for people's monthly income. And so within the actual portfolio structure, we try to reduce the amount of true cash that we hold as much as possible, which is different than, Amy was answering the question of like, how much cash as a household do I want to keep kind of on hand? And so those are two different things.
And on that note, I don't know if you're feeling like, again, take a quick look and see if you see anything.
There's so many questions, and I'm sure that we couldn't probably get to them all. I see one on annuities. What do we think about QLACs? A QLAC is a qualified longevity annuity contract that available within 401k plans. They can fit with a strategy. Let's say you were creating a 20-year bond ladder, and then you had a QLAC. So they have income that starts on a deferred basis. And so let's say your bond ladder was going to start at 65, and then your QLAC was going to turn on and the income was going to start at 85. They could be used in a strategy like that. The tax implications of it have concerned me in that you're creating a much larger stream of taxable income 20 years in the future. There's not a lot of flexibility. What's going to change over 20 years? So there's a lot of, again, like practical reasons of building them into a plan that they are not my favorite tool. But for someone that was very, as Wade Pfau talks about the different retirement income styles, someone that's very commitment oriented and really safety oriented, I think a strategy like that could work.
Yep.
All right.
That's all
I think we wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you. Your engagement as an audience is fabulous. It gives us all kinds of ideas for content. We really, really appreciate everyone showing up live. So many of you, and the questions you ask, it's just phenomenal. Yes, this will get posted on YouTube. It usually takes us about a week or so to do any post-production editing and get that out there. But you will get an email when it's ready. And so our next webinar is coming up in August, and we're taking a break over the summer, although I am thinking about sneaking in a surprise webinar on cybersecurity because we've had numerous instances lately of clients that have been scammed, not from their investment assets, but maybe their bank account or some other strange situations. So I may be putting something together over the summer. If so, watch for that announcement. Other than that, it will be in August. for our annual planning for healthcare costs and retirement. So thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.